Okay. Shall I begin?
No, first, Yasemin. Yeah.
Sorry, you tell me when. Okay.
Shall I begin? Sorry, I thought you were going to talk. Sorry, I'm here waiting for Murat to talk. So sorry. It's been ages since I've been on here, so just going to get a hang of it. Hello, everyone. I seriously have missed this platform for quite a while. It's nice to be back. It's nice to see you all back. I hope you guys have missed me as much as I've missed you all. Today thank you. Makes me feel much better. Today we have a great guest. James Griffiths is with us tonight. It's going to be a great event, seriously. He has a great topic to talk about and we are very eager to listen to him. But before I let him talk, I want to just briefly introduce to you all who James Griffiths is. James Griffiths finished his BA Bachelor's in 2008 in philosophy and linguistics at the University of Sheffield, and then he went on to his master's at University of Leiden in linguistics, and then he completed his PhD in 2015 in the University of Groningen. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And as for his academic positions, he's been in many academic positions. I'm just going to briefly give a few of them. He was an instructor in English in linguistics. He acted as professor in English linguistics at the University of Constance, and he was a research fellow at the same time and an associate research fellow again in another project, all in the University of Constance. Am I talking very fast? I'm very sorry. I'm going to try and slow down. And currently, he is a junior professor in English linguistics at the University of Tübingen. His area of interest, he likes to research formal syntax and semantics of amalgamation, apposition, as parentheticals, clarification requests, comment report clauses, echo questions, ellipses, clauses and verbal, extra null of extraposition, fragmentary responses, information structure, interjection, null objects of prepositions, piping, polar replies, quotation, relativization, split utterances. I can go on for hours and hours. Seriously, if you see his CV, there's no end. So I'm just going to stop it there. Tonight is our 56th meeting that we are together. And like I said before, tonight we are with Dr. James Griffiths. The title of his presentation is Reprise Fragments in English and Hungarian. Firstly, before I turn to you, James, thank you very much for being with us tonight. I have to say we are all very, very eager to listen to what you have said. Now the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for that very nice and detailed introduction. I now have to lower expectations as I go through this talk. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk here. It's very nice to be invited. As you mentioned, the kind of work that I like to do, you listed some of those phenomena. The thing that brings those phenomena together is usually when you look at their distribution, they're the types of things that are constrained by discourse constraints, but also formal constraints as well. And what I'm interested in doing is trying to work out exactly what the mixture between discursive constraints and formal constraints are on particular phenomena. And the talk that I will give this afternoon is no exception to that. The aim of the game is to say what's syntactic, what's discursive in deciding how this phenomena distributes. I often work on comparatively, so I usually compare English with another language, and again tonight I will do the same thing. And the reason I do this is because if you see language specific or cross-linguistic variation, it's pretty certain to be some kind of syntactic constraint that you're dealing with. So that's the use of this, and we will see this later on with the contrast of English and Hungarian today. So this research is going to be on fragmentary phenomena. So when you say a non-sentential utterance, usually in the response to something that somebody asks you or says to you, I should say that this is actually joint work that I'm reporting that I did with Annika Liptak at Leiden and Gulis Gunesh, who's at Tübingen with me. As I said, it's a long handout and I'm going to skip lots of this. I've put lots of information here in case it interests any of you after the talk. You can read it at your leisure. And I have to say, I will be extremely brief about Hungarian. It's not a language on which I'm the expert. Anika Liptak is the Hungarian speaker. It will be used predominantly as to exemplify or to contrast against English. So we will flick through the Hungarian examples very quickly, and they're there for anybody who wants to look at them, but I can't answer any questions really about Hungarian. Finally, before we begin, you'll see on the examples I give, often some of the examples are given a particular typeface. So small caps is to show a kind of intonational tune that is echoic in nature. You'll hear it in just a second. Sometimes I will put a little circumflex on the top of a vowel in a word. This is to show where the sentence accent is in that sentence. So it's just to give you an idea of where the intonation lies on some of these examples, okay? And I think that's all I need to say before we begin. So let's start. So today's talk is on reprise or reprise fragments. These are seemingly non-sentential questions, and they involve the repetition of a morpheme, a word, or a syntactic phrase from the most recent utterance that precedes it in the discourse. So let me give you some examples in 1 through to 3 here. These are all dialogues between person A and person B. If person A asks, is John a neurophysiologist? Person B might respond, neuro? No, he's just a physiologist. So the neuro there is a reprise fragment. Similarly, you can do this with just words. If person A asks, did Bo finagle a raise? You could say, Bo? Who's Bo? Or finagle? What does finagle mean? Each of these are going, This is this kind of echoic tune that comes with asking for clarification. Or we have a phrasal version in 3. Somebody asks, John bought a red car. I might say, sorry, a what car? Or maybe a red car, something like this, okay? Generally, these function to ask for clarification, whether that's a genuine request for information or just a conveying of surprise. It's the same type of use of this phenomenon. And this phenomenon has received some attention in what I would call the non-transformational field of generative linguistics, HPSG and frameworks like this. The focus of that research has been exclusively on English and exclusively on corpus data. In the transformational field of generativist linguistics that I predominantly work in, it's not really received any attention at all. So what the empirical contribution of today's talk will be is that this will be the first comparative study of these things, comparing English and Hungarian. It will be the first to use acceptability judgments. So I will show you negative data rather than just positive data from a corpus. And in terms of the theory, I'm going to suggest that reprise fragments have in common with standard fragments, and standard fragments are just non-reprise fragments. The commonality is that they will both be analyzed as actually elliptic clauses. So an entire clause, most of which has been deleted or has had its phonology suppressed. And I will also suggest that the only way to capture the quite varied distribution of these things is to adopt a particular licensing condition on ellipsis, namely my own. And I will take you through that as we go along. Now, I've shown you what a reprise fragment is. I would just quickly, before we move on to the data, show you what we're going to contrast it with throughout this talk, which is a standard fragment. Now, I should say, what do I mean by a standard fragment here? I just mean a paradigmatic and normal case of a fragmentary utterance. So a fragment answer, a fragment question, a corrective fragment, and an additive type. Let me just show you a few. So a fragmentary response to a question like, what did Taylor eat, would just be a fruit salad, okay? Or maybe a fragmentary question to something like someone left would be, oh, who? That would be the fragmentary question. Maybe a contrastive fragment would be something like this. Chris left, no, Bill. to mean no, Bill left, okay? All of these are fragments of a standard type, and we'll be contrasting these with the reprise versions. Okay, so the way that this is organized is I'm going to show you a whole load of data, try and give a distribution of within and across English and Hungarian, and then afterwards we'll build the analysis. The data section is quite long, and because there is a lot of variation. The main thing we're going to look at is whether or not a particular fragment type shows properties that suggests that it's an A-bar moved element. So we're going to look at fragments and say, hey, does it look like it's got A-bar properties? Does it look like it's a moved thing or not? And we'll start with English and start with standard fragments before we go to the reprise versions. Now, the prevailing view about English standard fragments is that they do show the hallmarks of being A-bar moved phrases. And I'll show you 3 properties that suggest this. The first one, and this goes back to the late 70s, early 80s, is that English standard fragments seemingly are only fully acceptable if they are of a phrasal type which could be moved in a normal situation, that could undergo movement. So usually that's main constituents, things like adverbial phrases, adjective phrases, noun phrases, prepositional phrases, okay? And if we have a fragment that's a phrase of that type, it's judged as fully acceptable. Let me just give you one example here. How often does she swim? Frequently. That's perfectly fine. Is he rich? No. Poor? Fine. Who arrived late? Bill. These are all okay. When we try and make fragments out of phrases that are in other situations usually immovable under A-bar movement, we get degradation in acceptability judgments. Things get worse, okay? I'll give you just maybe 2 examples of this. If we look here at 6D, if somebody says, Lisa will tilt the image, and if you try and answer with no revolve, English speakers don't like that just plain verb. They want to say no, revolve it, and have the verbal phrase revolve it rather than just revolve, okay? And obviously verbs by themselves, transitive verbs, can't undergo movement in English normally. So that captures, this falls in line with this constraint. Another case would be a preposition by itself. Under the bed is the best hiding place, says person A. Person B says, no, in. It doesn't work. You'd have to say no, in the bed, and have a full prepositional phrase. Now, these aren't fully unacceptable if you ask people, but they are degraded when compared to these, and that's the important thing, okay? Now, the cases in 7 show the same thing. I will skip past these in the interest of time, but it's the same thing. We have to have movable phrases to have good fragments. The second property that shows us that standard fragments have to be A-bar movable things is something called the preposition stranding generalization, which is about 15 years old. And I'll show you what this is now. So it was noticed in 2001 that languages that allow preposition stranding normally, so they allow movement of the complement of a prepositional phrase and the stranding of the preposition in a low position, they allow fragments that are interpreted as the complement of a preposition, but without the preposition there. You don't actually have to say the preposition in the fragment. English is one such language. We allow preposition stranding normally, and we allow fragments without prepositions in them. So let me show you. John spoke with a blonde girl, and you can easily answer yes, and another girl too, something like this. You don't have to say yes and with another girl too. That's not necessary in English. We can contrast that with a language like German. German does not usually allow preposition stranding under a question formation. The only way to make a question with a prepositional phrase is with a prepositional phrase. So number 10, mit wem hat Anna gesprochen, with whom has Anna spoken. You have to you have to take the entire prepositional phrase to the top of the clause. You couldn't say, wem hat Anna mitgesprochen? So who has Anna spoken with? That's bad in German, right? Now, the fragments aren't allowed to have their prepositions disappear either. So you can't answer a question like, with whom has Anna spoken, with just her father in German. You would have to say, mit ihrem Vater, with her father, okay? Now, what does this show us? It's supposed to show us that these fragments are acting a bit like moved items. I could potentially strand a preposition and have this as a moved item to make a fragment here, but this would never survive a stranding in German because we couldn't strand a preposition. So it's acting like a moved element because moved elements can't be DPs bare in German, okay? I hope that's clear. The final property that I want to show you today is something called the fact that standard fragments in English and in German as well, as far as I know, obey what's called the island sensitivity generalization, which simply states that if a fragment corresponds to something in the clause that precedes it, and the thing that it corresponds to happens to be in a syntactic island in the clause that precedes it, then the fragment itself will be judged as degraded or unacceptable. So let's call the thing with which the fragment corresponds the correlate. This statement says we can't have island-bound correlates for a fragment, okay? I'll give you some examples to make this clear. So imagine that person A says, they examined a well-prepared student today. So this DP is an island for left branch extraction out of it. And so the thing here, which would be well, is in an island. Now, what we can't do is have a fragment that corresponds to this. So I can't answer with yes, very well, in this case. I'll say the whole dialogue again. They examined a well-prepared student today. Yes, very well. It doesn't mean yes, they examined a very well-prepared student. It just means the examination went very well, which would be a completely different sentence altogether, right? Or let me give you one more case. Here we've got father and mother corresponding. And I've put father inside an island, just to make it super clear. And it's just impossible to get a good reading for this fragment here. So Pete wonders who Sue's father will fire, and mother too. It's impossible to interpret this as meaning yes, and Pete wonders who Sue's mother will fire too. It doesn't make any sense, okay? So what this tells us is it suggests to us that these fragments act a bit like moved elements, because if they are sensitive to islands, and islands are a phenomenon to do with syntactic movement, syntactic displacement, these things seem to act like displaced or moved elements, okay? So far, 3 properties. Only movable constituents can be good fragments. The preposition stranding generalization is obeyed with standard fragments, and the island sensitivity generalization is obeyed as well with standard fragments in English. Now, there's one important point here where it's now going to start to get less, the generalizations and the data become less nice, is that it's actually not the case with all standard fragments in English that they behave like moved items. It seems to actually depend on the type of antecedent, the type of thing that precedes it in the discourse, that gives it this property of being A-bar movement-like or not. What I have shown you so far, the antecedent has always been either just an assertion, like a standard declarative statement, or it's been a WH question, a who question, a what question, something like this. it turns out actually that if you have an alternative question as the antecedent, this A-bar property situation disappears. No longer do we need to have fragments that are movable items. We have fully acceptable fragments now that can be immovable things. So I'll give you an example here in 16b. Is in or under the bed the best hiding place? Under, I reckon. Now that under is just a fragment by itself, is now fine. Similarly, and this one I happened to find in a very old journal from Zwicky, are you traveling to or from Africa? To. And now this bare preposition is absolutely fine as a fragmentary response by itself. Another thing, if you have an alternative question for the antecedent and you ask Dutch speakers to do a preposition stranding style fragment where the preposition disappears, they can now do this. They can now take the preposition away and it's no problem for them. So the example here is, and I'll just say this in English, does the plant stand next to the sofa or to the table? So next to the sofa, right? So here's the preposition. Now, normally in Dutch, you would have to say next to the sofa as the response, but now you don't. Not with an alternative question antecedent. You can just say the sofa as a response, okay? So that is the caveat here, is most of the time with standard fragments in English, they act like A-moved elements, but actually, if you test it with alternative question antecedents, you find that fragments suddenly lose this A-bar quality to them. Okay. So that's English standard fragments. We're now going to keep with English and move on to the reprise fragments cases, the ones that are new and interesting for us for today's talk. I'm going to go through the same three properties as we've just seen, and basically what we'll see is the reprise fragments show none of the A-bar properties that we just saw for standard fragments, okay? So firstly, they do not obey in any way the major constituent constraint that we saw. They can be items of any syntactic category type you like. I've even found ones that can be bar level constituents. So they can be words, bar levels, or phrases of any type, really. So here's a verb by itself. Did Bo finagle a raise? You can easily say finagle, like as in, did he finagle a raise? No, he won it fair and square. He didn't try and con somebody to get his raise. You could have just a bar level. Will the boss fire Dracula and Cthulhu on Monday? I've used stupid names here to make it surprising. And Cthulhu, it works perfectly well, okay? Now you might think here, well, actually these reprise fragments, they're just not actually linguistic. You're just repeating a string of words. There's no constraints on this whatsoever. Now, I thought that as well until I realized that if you try and do some morphological or a syntactic non-constituent, they don't work. They're unacceptable. So I've shown you before that you can have just single morphemes as reprise fragments, but you can do that provided they obey the morpheme structure of the word in question. If you disobey the morpheme structure of the word in question, things don't work anymore. So for example, if person A says, this is unbelievable, and you say unbe, now this is just nonsense. And the reason is because I've cut into a morpheme, believe, here, right? So it's not a constituent anymore, not a morphological constituent. Or if I try and take the first part of this coordinate structure, just Dracula and, if you think about the syntactic tree for this, this would actually be a non-constituent. It doesn't work. The boss will fire Dracula and Cthulhu, sorry, will the boss fire Dracula and Cthulhu on Monday? Dracula and, very bad, very poor, doesn't work at all. So the point I'm trying to make here is, although these are very free in terms of their ability to, they can basically be any morphological or syntactic constituent, they have to be a constituent. They can't be just a string, okay? And the other important point is this is unlike the standard fragments, which are much more constrained. So we saw previously with the standard fragments that they were obeying this preposition stranding generalization. In German, you always had to have the preposition. In English, you didn't need it. Now, when it comes to reprise fragments, this generalization just doesn't hold at all. You don't need to keep the preposition, even in languages that don't allow preposition stranding normally, like German. So looking at German here, if one says Maria has spoken with her father, mit ihrem Vater, you can easily just respond with ihrem Vater, no problem. Okay, you don't have to say mit anymore. Again, in contrast to the standard cases. And the final contrast, the island sensitivity. So we saw previously that standard fragments are island sensitive, not the case with the reprise type. So even if I've got this reprise fragment corresponding to this thing that is doubly island bound, I've double locked it if you like, it's easily referable to that thing. So if we say something like the fact that a Labour member of Parliament threatened John is comical, so that's a sentential subject with a left branch extraction. I can easily say Labour as a fragment, as a reprise fragment. It's no problem at all. So this is totally different, right? And if we actually, just to have a quick summary here, if we look at how English is distributed, what we've seen for the three properties that I've shown you is that reprise fragments just don't act like, they don't show these A-bar properties relative to these things at all. With some standard fragments, the ones with alternative questions, they also don't show these properties. I've actually not tested this final thing. It's only unknown because I haven't tested it. That's the only reason. But the standard declarative fragment, the standard English fragments with declarative antecedents, they all pattern as having A-bar properties. Okay. So it seems that maybe there's a functional distinction here. Being a standard fragment makes you different to being a reprise fragment. And indeed, that's what you'd think was happening if you didn't do some comparative research and look at a funky language like Hungarian. What we're going to see now as we turn to Hungarian and very quickly pass these examples is, unlike with English, both Hungarian and standard fragments just pattern identically across the board with each other. They will all display the properties of A-bar moved items. It doesn't matter whether they're reprise or whether they're standard cases. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you very quickly the same properties as we saw before. Okay, so it's not anything new, it's just in a different language. I'm actually not showing you any good Hungarian fragments here, only bad ones. In this first case here, these are all examples where what I've tried to do, or what we've tried to do, is take an immovable element and make a fragment out of it. In the standard cases, it doesn't work for any of these cases. So for example, if you try with the TP, if somebody says people are concerned about something, yes, this vaccine is poisonous, and that's just a TP. So without that, this doesn't work in Hungarian. TPs are immovable, right? What else have we got here that I can show you maybe? If you just try and do a morpheme, this vaccine was made using gene technology. That's what gene technology looks like in Hungarian. You can't just answer with nano to mean, no, this vaccine was made with nanotechnology. That doesn't work in standard cases, okay? What else can I show you? The same pattern occurs with the standard fragments, with the reprise fragments. If you try and do, let's say, a TP again as a reprise fragment, it just doesn't work. People are concerned that the vaccine is poisonous. This vaccine is poisonous, doesn't work, okay? Or again with gene here, this works in English, but not in Hungarian. This vaccine was made using gene technology. Gene doesn't work for Hungarian, okay? Let me show you some more things to prove that they're similar. let's have a look at the preposition stranding generalization. So I should first say about Hungarian that Hungarian is a language that does not allow preposition stranding normally. And it patterns like most languages in the world, as far as I know, like this. As far as I know, Turkish doesn't allow preposition stranding either, or in most cases at least. Hungarian is the same as this. So if we try to make this is not ellipsis anymore, just a standard WH question. What did Danny find the pen under, where I've tried to strand something out of the postposition? What is here? The postposition stays down here. It doesn't work in Hungarian at all. Okay, you would have to say, under what did Danny find the pen? So what we expect to see is that we can't have fragments without their preposition either. And that expectation is realized both for standard fragments and reprise fragments in Hungarian. Okay, so I've got both cases here. Danny found the pen under the closet. No, the piano, to mean no, under the piano. That doesn't work in Hungarian. So it does in English, not in Hungarian. Okay, and the same for the reprise case. Danny found the pen under the closet. The closet doesn't work. You would have to say under the closet, then it would work. So it seems for Hungarian, this preposition stranding generalization fits for both standard and reprise fragments. Okay. And now the final property. Okay, so island sensitivity. Both standard and reprise fragments are island sensitive in Hungarian. And I have an example here. Maybe I'll show you the second example because I don't know how to pronounce this word and it turns up and I don't want to embarrass myself too much. So we'll go with this case here. So here we have Aza Torrance has a adjunct island. Gabby is angry because nobody plays with Mickey, and here's Mickey inside the island. Now, with a standard fragmentary response like no, Tibby, as in to mean no, so-and-so is angry because Tibby played blah, blah, blah. Oh, here it is. No, she's angry because nobody played with Tibby. This just doesn't work. Okay, so we see island sensitivity. And interestingly, in Hungarian, the same holds, exactly the same judgment holds for the reprise fragment cases. Okay. Now that's the main A-bar or not data. Does it show A-bar properties? Does it not? And I've now done English standard and reprise fragments and Hungarian standard and reprise fragments. And the empirical landscape looks as follows, basically. Hungarian always patterns with yes. And we've already seen that English is a bit of a mixed bag. We see A-bar properties for some cases, and for the reprise fragments, definitely no. And for some of the standard fragments, no, some of the time. Okay. So we'll keep that in mind, we'll store that. And I want to show you one more big data point, and then we'll try and analyze the data. Okay. What I want to show you now is that standard and reprise fragments both show the same connectivity and anti-connectivity effects. And I'll tell you what connectivity effects are as we go along. So to explain what connectivity effects are, I have to actually tell you a little bit about the ellipsis theory as it stands at the moment. So in most of the transformational generative literature, the favorite way of looking at fragmentary responses is to actually treat them as full clauses from a syntactic perspective, but with which clauses in which most of the material is actually unpronounced in some way or another. So it's an ellipsis, it's a clausal ellipsis. And the thing that survives the ellipsis, the actual fragment that we see on the surface, is usually called the remnant of ellipsis, okay? So a typical analysis of a sentence like, Sue will hire somebody, but I don't know who, is to say that in reality, underlyingly, the sentence is Sue will hire someone, but I don't know who Sue will hire. Sorry, that D shouldn't be there. Sue will hire, okay? And this grey highlighting will henceforth refer to non-pronunciation, okay, of syntactic material. Now, the reason why this sententialist style approach to fragments is favored is because it gives us a very easy way to model the fact that this element usually has shows many of the properties of being dependent upon something that's inside here. So maybe it will show case marking, and it's easy to say, okay, it has case marking because it originally started inside this clause, it has case dependency with a verb inside this clause, so on and so forth, okay? Now, when the thing outside of the ellipsis site, when the fragment shows or appears to have a dependency with some silent material, we say it has a connectivity effect. But actually, sometimes the fragment shows a behavior that actually is unexpected if indeed there is silent structure. And when that arises, we say it shows an anti-connectivity effect. Okay, so that's the jargon there. Now it transpires, as I mentioned earlier, that standard and reprise fragments just pattern identically with respect to the connectivity or anti-connectivity effects that they show. And I'm going to show you this for a few of the cases now, only for English, but it's the same for Hungarian. You'll have to take my word for this, okay? And I'll just show you a few of these. Maybe it's actually best just to look at German, frankly, to begin with. So here we are, yeah. Let's start with the standard fragment from German. So if somebody asks a question in German, which has case marking, like wem folgt Hans, who follows Hans? Now, follow is the type of verb in German that takes a datively case marked object, and we see this on the WH phrase wem, it's the M. Now, if you want to have a fragmentary response to this, like the teacher, it also has to show dative case marking on the. It has to be dem Lehrer. It can't be den Lehrer. Okay. Now, the easiest way to account for this is to say, well, actually, this is part of a full sentence, most of which has been elided, and it enters into a case dependency with the verb follow, and that's how the dative case arises. Okay. Now, interestingly, the reprise fragments show precisely the same thing. So if person A in German says, ist dieser, with an R, Platz noch frei, is this place free? You would have to answer with dieser Platz, this place, and you couldn't answer with any other case possibility. It's impossible, okay? So it has to be also here the nominative, because we saw the nominative in the antecedent situation. So that's a case of connectivity effects. And basically all of the sentences that flood the next few pages show exactly the same thing. Just to give you one or two more, if we have a verb that ends, for example, in a particular aspectual or tense morpheme, like in this case, we have ing, so this is the progressive. What is John doing? You have to answer with washing his car. You can't say washed or wash his car, something like this, okay? And the same is the case with reprise fragments. Did he adore the book? Adore, he hated it. You have to say just adore. You can't say adored or something like this, okay? There are some interesting exceptions to this, which are in this very, very long footnote. You can look at that at your leisure and maybe check and tell me if Turkish acts the same way. It'd be interesting to know. I'll give you one more just to hammer home the point. All right. We'll look at 44 here. So here is a case of scope, or I think this is variable binding, actually. So who does every Englishman admire is what A is asking in the antecedent. And you can answer with his mother to get this distributive reading where we have many Englishmen and there are many mothers, and we can have a pair list reading for this, right? So we can say Gerald loves his mother, Norman loves his mother, so on and so forth, okay? And the usual way to understand this is to say, well, this is actually can reconstruct inside an elided clause, and that's how we get the scope reading that we do. Now, precisely the same reading is available for the reprise fragments as well. Every Englishman admires his mother. His mother, no, it's his father that he admires. Okay, and we can have this same scopal reading here as well. What all of this tells you, and there's obviously more data here to convince you of this case, is that we have these connectivity effects in both fragment cases. Okay, and that's the main data point that I'm trying to make in that section. So now let's summarize all the data that we've accumulated and looked at here. So we've seen that the formal properties of standard and reprise fragments do vary significantly for English. In English, only standard fragments with declarative or WH question antecedents show the A-bar properties. In Hungarian, it's totally different. All fragments show A-bar properties. But we've seen that they show the same connectivity effects, okay? And this is the new row that I've added to our table here. We've just got yes, yes, yes, yes, yes, all across the board. What does this tell us? I'll tell you what I think it tells us. I think it tells us that at a fundamental level, reprise and fragment and standard fragments are derived in the same way. I think they're both derived via a clausal ellipsis operation. So they are both, you can imagine them both as actual full sentences, most of which is unpronounced. In the standard fragment cases, we're dealing with declaratives or questions, standard questions that just get elided. And in the reprise fragment cases, we're dealing with echo questions that get mostly deleted, okay? Now, what we still have to account for, though, we still need a theory to describe the within and the across language variety that we observe, okay? So I think that the across language variation that we observe must be formal in nature. It must be to do with how English and Hungarian make their underlying sentences differently, the sentences that underlie the fragments. I think that the within language variation might be discursive or pragmatic in nature, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. Hopefully I will have time. I realize it's now 1:45, but we'll see how far we get, okay? So let me give you what I think is the best way to account for the vast majority of this data. So I'm going to support a clausal ellipsis analysis that has the following properties. I'm going to say that ellipsis applies to a clause and it actually applies selectively. So it will delete all the stuff in that clause except for something that has focus marking on it, something that's new or has sentential accent or some tune on it, okay? And aside from that, nothing else is going to change. Ellipsis doesn't change what can move and what can't. It doesn't make exceptional movement happen. It's the same clause that you would see normally, except for ellipsis occurs. Now, for any of you that have some familiarity with the ellipsis literature, this is actually not a commonly held view of ellipsis. What people usually say is that ellipsis is actually unselective. It will apply in an entire clause and it will delete everything inside of that. And so what we normally have to do is move something out of an elliptic clause. That's not, I'm against that approach, and I believe that this data is really the nail on the coffin against that approach. I really think it's decisive against it, okay? So just to give you an example of what I would say a fragmentary utterance would look like, the analysis I would give it is something like this. So for an interrogative fragmentary utterance, also known as a sluice, like Sally fired someone, but we don't know who, it would just be a standard WH clause, most of which has been deleted, okay? For a case like Sally fired someone, yeah, Bob. Bob would stay in his object position, nothing interesting is happening, we're just deleting around Bob, okay? Good. Now, with these assumptions in place, I think we can straightforwardly account for the reason that English reprise fragments don't show any A-bar properties at all. And the reason for this is because reprise questions, that is echo questions in English, are not derived via movement. They don't involve any movement at all to make one. famously, if you want to ask an echo question in English, you keep the WH phrase or the echoic element in situ, right? And I think that explains why these fragments have no A-bar properties at all to them, because they haven't undergone movement within their elided clause. So the reprise fragments that we saw at the very start of this talk, that's what they would look like. They would be derived from a reprise question, such as something like, John has bought a what car? That's how you do an echo question in English. Or, sorry, did Bob finagle a raise? That would be the way that you would say these things, okay? And that explains it. That's the explanation. It's not hard, really. They have no A-bar properties because we don't have A-bar movement in that underlying clause. Now, interestingly, if you remember, Hungarian reprise fragments do show A-bar properties. Our prediction, of course, is that's because Hungarian echo questions are made via WH movement or A-bar movement. And lo and behold, they are made by A-bar movement. You always have to do A-bar movement to make an echo question. Let me show you that that's true. If person A says in Hungarian, I'd like a snowboard, you can't say, and this is in the B prime here, sorry, you'd like what? You have to say in Hungarian, sorry, what would you like? So you would have to do the movement. Okay, you have to do the movement to the front of the clause in Hungarian. And generally, what we're going to see in Hungarian is it always moves stuff. In fact, that's the only thing you ever need to know about Hungarian, is it has a focus position in its left periphery, and it always moves stuff there. That's effectively it. Okay. Now, of course, this explains the island sensitivity of Hungarian reprise fragments. Their echo questions are also island sensitive. You can't say, who is Gabby angry because he did not invite her? Where I've tried to do some movement out of an island to form an echo question. Doesn't work in Hungarian. Unsurprising, it's just movement. And movement is, of course, always bound, island bound. The same all the way through. So you see the analysis here is these things are, the fragments are island sensitive in Hungarian because they are island, because they are derived from echo questions, and echo questions are made by movement. Okay, it's super simple. In fact, this explanation applies to all of the simple cases that you can think of. So if we take a standard question fragment in English, that will show A-bar properties for the simple reason that its underlying clause is a standard question in English, and we make questions by doing WH fronting in English. And it's the same for Hungarian. Their standard questions are made in this way, and they also do fronting in the same way. We do have a problem though, and here's where the problem comes in. Remember, cast your minds back to the fact that English standard fragments that aren't necessarily questions, so something like Bob as an answer to who did Mary kiss, that does show A-bar properties. It is island sensitive. It can only be a main constituent. But the question is why? Why, right? If I just go back for a second here, if this is the derivation for a standard fragment like this, why does this show A-bar properties? Because according to my analysis, it's undergoing absolutely no movement whatsoever inside its elliptic clause. Okay, so why does it show these A-bar properties? That's the conundrum. That's the problem. Now, what you might want to do, here's a possible solution here, is to say, actually, under ellipsis, these types of things like Bob that you just saw on the previous screen, it actually does undergo movement, but only in elliptical contexts, okay? It does undergo movement. For some reason, it always has to undergo movement, and that's what gives it the A-bar properties that it has. Now, my answer to this is no. So, I mean, you could say that, but you would be missing the fact that there are other types of fragments in English that simply don't show these properties. So we can't always have this movement. It has to happen sometimes, but not others, okay? Also, another property is you can find fragmentary responses where you keep a little bit, some words inside the fragmentary clause. They always turn up in the order that you would expect if ellipsis was not there. And it would be really hard to say that all three of these elements somehow move to the front of the clause. So an example would be something like, if somebody says to me, or somebody says, Sally's writing love songs again, you might answer, why? And who even for? Who even for, right? Who is she even writing them for? Now, if you try and move all of these elements to get exactly that word order, it's going to be hard. So I think this is an argument against trying to just force this analysis, okay? The other problem is that if this analysis were true, that we moved things to the front, it would actually be against what English syntax does generally with focused items. English does not move its foci, or at least its new information foci. In English, if we do new information, we keep it down low. We don't move it. It's like Turkish. You keep your focus nice and low. At least, actually, some people disagree with that, but I would say that Turkish keeps its focus down low, and English is the same. So if somebody says Sally will hire someone today, you have to answer with yes, she'll hire John today. Saying, yeah, John she'll hire today is weird. It's a strange thing to do. It gives it this topic feel. And it's not a topic, it's just an answer, okay? So all of these reasons come together and give us a reason to suppose that actually this type of analysis, saying, okay, exceptionally, these types of fragments just move in the elliptical case, I think that's not a good enough explanation here. So what do I think is actually happening? Okay, just to give us a quick overview before I take the last few minutes to explain what I think is happening here is, so far I put forward a theory that allows everything to stay where it is and just has ellipsis happening around things. And we've been able to describe the properties of all these various fragments purely based on the properties of the clause that underlies these fragments, okay? And it just turns out that Hungarian generates things using movement all the time. English doesn't, and in its echo questions, it doesn't need to use movement at all, okay? And our problem is these just standard, the problem turns out to be the standard cases, namely, oh God, where is it? Just our standard responses. Sally fired someone, yeah, Bob, that's the hard case, all right? Now, I'm going to have to skip past a lot of the kind of introductory part to what I'd like to say here and just get to the meat of what I'm going to say. So I think I will do this without actually showing you anything on the handout. But what I'd like to say is this. So I'm just going to say it in words. There has been a fair amount of research in the ellipsis literature to suggest that the licensing of a clausal ellipsis is contingent on questions. So in particular, people have suggested that the question under discussion in the discourse, so this idea that we're always answering some inferred or some explicit question in the discourse, that's really the licenser of ellipsis. And whenever you are saying some fragmentary response, it's actually a response to that either explicit or inferred question in the discourse. Even if you've got some explicitly uttered element or utterance in the prior discourse, if it's not a question, you infer a question to answer, okay? So if we take a situation like this one, Mary has fired someone, and you answer with yes, Bob. In this particular literature about questions under discussion, they would analyze this as follows. They would say, it's actually not the case that this is answering or responding to Mary fired someone. What's happening is a little bit more indirect. Mary has fired someone brings about a question. Who has Mary fired? And this response here is answering that question. Bob, okay? Who has Mary fired? Bob, okay? Now, my idea here is to take this literature and build on it a little bit and to say, well, in this particular situation, most people think that the inferred question is just a meaning. It's not something linguistic. It's like an information state, if you like, that's in the discourse, floating around in the discourse. It doesn't have any linguistic form attached to it, okay? My crazy suggestion is this, is at least for the case of ellipsis, it does. There is some evidence to suggest that ellipsis is sensitive to linguistic form and actually is licensed according to the linguistic form of some antecedent. And so to link these two ideas, you can say, in these particular cases, there is a question that's inferred, but that question is actually a linguistic, it's an interrogative. So you infer an actual fully syntactically derived question. And then it's that question, and in this case, that would be, who has Mary fired? That would then be the licenser for Bob, in this case. Now, if that's true, that can actually explain the A-bar properties that we saw before for all of these cases. Because remember, making a question requires movement. So you can only make good questions if you do movement to make those questions, in English at least, right? If I want to make a question with a who or with whom or something, I can only move certain things, PPs, DPs, APs, to even make that question. So an answer to that question is always going to be the same thing, a DP, an AP, or a CP, or something like this. And it's actually that fact that derives the A-bar properties of these things, not the fact that they're undergoing movement inside their ellipsis clause. So it's an indirect relationship that's happening. The licenser always has to be a question, and if it's not explicitly uttered, it's an inferred question. To generate that question, you have to use a WH movement in English. And if you just can't generate the question, you could never respond or have a illicit response to that question. And that via this chain of reasoning brings you to the fact that these things will always have A-bar properties, okay? So that's it in a nutshell. Just to recap, because I know you've been very patient here and I'm almost at the hour point, is having a basic in situ theory of ellipsis gives us everything we want except for these cases. I say that we can get these cases if we have a more refined idea about how elliptical clauses relate to their antecedents. If we allow them to relate to inferred questions, as some of the literature suggests, we can account for the whole spectrum, the variety that I showed you today. And this is all summarized in a rather large table that you can peruse at your leisure, but it will effectively derive all of the properties that I've shown you today. And I conclude from this that we need a theory of ellipsis that can account for the variety that we saw both within and across languages, and in terms of different functions, standard versus reprise. And a nice way to capture this is with the theory that I've put forward here today. And I will stop there. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Well, firstly, I would like to thank you. This topic, your talk was brilliant. Seriously, I wasn't even aware that we were at the hour point until you told me, because we were so drawn in. It's very interesting and very fun. Thank you. Seriously, on my behalf, I enjoyed it. It was lovely. Thank you very much for taking out time. And we could have continued for another hour, I think, because judging from the faces, everybody seems very happy. And I know that Murat is very, very happy because he loves these topics. So we could have stayed. Look, he's got loads of notes and loads of questions. Seriously, a great topic. Great talk. Thank you very much. You had our attention from the beginning right to the end. Thank you. Now it's time for the questions. Who has questions? And I think we're beginning with Murat. Yes.
Okay.
Who is yours?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the great talk. I met James at EG this year. He's a great teacher. he's really great. I mean, in what he's doing. Okay, so we couldn't really understand how this 1 hour really passed. So it was a great talk.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I've noted down 3 things basically. First, I was just wondering, this p-stranding generalization, I think, originally belongs to merchant, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's correct.
So as far as I can see, it's come a long way since your, until your reformulation. So I think that there was a lot of alteration. I mean, there was a lot of changes in the original reformulation, as far as I can see. Because the original one says something like this: all languages that allow p-stranding under a movement also allows p-stranding under a bar movement. Right? So yeah, I was just looking at your definition right now.
Why did I reframe it is perhaps your question, right? Yeah. So there's 2 reasons really. One of which is I didn't want to start talking about merchants. So merchants framing is actually it's not theory neutral. So he's already assuming that we have silent structure to be able to account just in his formulation, right? So to say we have p-stranding, we're stranding prepositions inside the ellipsis site is to assume that there is an ellipsis site, first of all. And I didn't really want to give away the idea that we do have silent structure until a little bit further into the talk. And so this is a much more neutral formulation of it, just to say, if you have a fragment that's a bare DP, that is to say it's understood as the complement of a preposition, and the preposition appears to be omitted in some way, then it's okay in languages like English that can do stranding, but it's not okay in languages like German that can't. Now, of course, merchants' formulation of this really gets to the heart of probably what's happening here, right? Which is that WH movement and WH preposition stranding is really the key behind what's happening. But I didn't want to give that game away just yet. So just in case there's anybody maybe that's not so familiar with this kind of literature and stuff, can I actually write on the slides? Is that feasible here?
I think you should be allowed.
Yeah, I think I am able to. So the idea here is that, for example, if we look at 10b, which is bad, we have you'll see it in a second, I think. Vater hat Anna mit gesprochen. Okay, I think that'll do. Sorry, just make it look a bit nicer. So the idea, sorry, there should be a trace here. So if all of this undergoes deletion that I'm currently going over with my cursor, then that's why the preposition disappears. And that's the idea of stranding the preposition inside the ellipsis site, right? But there are many people that work on ellipsis that simply don't believe that there is silent structure at all, even though I think this is a quite strong argument for it. So they prefer to call this property p omission. They just say, can a preposition disappear when you have a fragment or not? But yeah, I think that misses a generalization here. Maybe I can stop there. There's something else I could say about this if you want me to, but perhaps this is the question.
That's okay.
Feel free to talk.
Okay.
You have all the time in the world.
Okay. Another thing that I've completely glossed over here is that there is a possibility always of having an elliptical clause that simply just wouldn't have the preposition in it at all, right? So let me give you an example here. We'll do it with English. John spoke with a blonde girl. No, sorry. Thinking on the spot sometimes is a bit difficult.
Yes.
It was Yeah, okay. So imagine we have something like John spoke with someone, and you answer with, yes, Bill. A possibility here is that the ellipsis site is actually something like, yes, it was Bill, right? Can you see as I'm typing here?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. And of course, that's a completely different structure potentially for the ellipsis site than the whole thing. Yes, he spoke with Bill. And in this case, I would call this a preposition evading structure, because you simply just don't have the preposition in the elliptical clause anymore. I've tried to control for these in all of the examples I've given. So in German, because it has case marking, if you tried to do this, if you just said something like, mit wem hat Anne gesprochen, and you answer Hans, it could just be, it was Hans as the ellipsis site, and you don't know because Hans won't be case marked. The only way that you can ensure that you're definitely dealing with something like, yes, he spoke with Hans, is to have something that's case marked, and that's why I've got Ihrem Vater here, because it has dative case, right? If it was his father with it was his father, so it was his father. In German, that would take the nominative case, which, showing my lack of German here, I don't even know what the nominative case would be, probably Ihre Vater, something like this. Okay, so the nominative version instead. So you could tell in German because of what the case would be. And I can enforce the case here and ensure that it's dative case marking using, ensure the preposition is there using the dative case marking. So going back to it, the preposition stranding generalization, it should really be that you see prepositions being omitted when you can control for the case, and it's in a language that allows preposition stranding. That's the real full version of that generalization, but that's more complex. Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a second point here, but it's not a question. It's something that I certainly agree on.
Okay.
I love your examples, by the way. So the one, will the boss fire Dracula and Cthulhu on Monday? Yeah, it was a good one. It seems here that we should certainly look for the constituencies, right? Because in your example, there was this fragment answer like Dracula ends, which was ungrammatical, right?
Yeah, so for sure.
It implies that we should certainly look for patterns or constituencies here in order to understand what is going on behind this reprise fragment answers and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So this is certainly something that I agree on. It's not something pragmatic or discursive or whatever. It must be, there must be a syntactic reason for this.
I think the same. So pursuing this idea that when you reprise, you just repeat a bit of a string, and it's a very metalinguistic thing, a very surfacey thing. People have suggested that in the past. But as I've tried to show, I'm in complete agreement with you. It just doesn't happen like that. Like, it's definitely constituents that are being used. There is one case that I found where it seems unlike that. Oh, I should try and remove this annotation. How do I do that? Clear, I think. Clear all drawings. There we go. And I would just come back to it because it was in that very large footnote. And I think this gives us an opportunity to talk about that. See if I can find it. Sorry. Here, somewhere down here. Yeah, so let's look at these cases that you can see here in Roman 1 and Roman 2. So something that was quite interesting that we found when we were looking at this is you can have something that just looks like a bare verb sometimes as a reprise fragment, and this does just look like I'm kind of repeating just a string or even maybe like the dictionary entry for this verb. So by the way, confusticate is not a verb that's used very commonly in English at all. I purposely choosing verbs that nobody knows, because then you would ask, what does that mean, right? I think it means to puzzle somebody or like to confuse them. So John has been confusticating Mary again, says person A, and person B says confusticate, as in, what does confusticate mean? Okay. Now, I could also say confiscating. That's no problem. The interesting thing we found here for Hungarian was that you do the same thing here with Aniko used a verb that means predict, but apparently it's not a very common one, is you have to keep all of the morphology for the Hungarian case. You can't just have the bare verb at all. So this is another example. I thought here in English, this is just string repetition. But the Hungarian case shows us quite nicely that it's not. There is some morphological constituency that's happening here. What I haven't worked out, what is completely an open question for me, is why does this differ? Why is Hungarian different to English here? I don't know why. And I don't know how this differs across languages. We spoke a little bit about Turkish with this, because Gülis was involved in the project as well. Mm-hmm. She said to me that Turkish acts a bit more like English than Hungarian here. But I'd love to hear your comments on this generally as a group. What you think if you were to take some sentence with a verb that's got all its morphology on it, you reprise it. Can you do the bare verb, or do you have to have all the morphology on it?
Nice question. Yes, let's give some time.
Yeah, it takes a long time to think.
Yes,
of course.
Okay, should we do it?
Probably we can omit the morphology.
Yeah, I think so.
That's what she said, right?
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we have an example?
Bu beni ırgalamaz. Irgalamak, right?
What does that mean?
Yeah, doesn't interest me. Irgalamak, right? Irgalamak. Irgalamaz has morphology on it, but yeah. You can just,
you just say galamak.
Galamak.
And so you have to remind me, for reprise questions in general, you don't need to have a question morpheme, do you? In fact, you can't put one on. Like galamak.
Mak is just a nominalizer or something.
Okay. The nominalizer. But you can use that for the dictionary form of verbs. That's what you have for this, right?
Like infinitive too.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I see. Okay, so Turkish acts like English.
Yeah.
Like why? Why does it not act like Hungarian in this respect? So I've got no idea why. Obviously, all three languages are from different language families. It surprises me. And if anybody can work out why this is the case, please let me know. You can email me. I'd love to know the answer behind
Please tell us all, though, because we're all very curious here.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We'd like to know. Yeah. And I hope that somebody will turn out to carry this study out in Turkish, maybe. Could give an idea.
There is lots to discover in Reprise Fragments. So as you can tell, I've all the previous work has been done on corpus data. There are no acceptability judgment tests at all. And so this is really a, pioneering field. There's lots that could be done here. So if anybody's interested, yeah, for sure, do it in Turkish or another language, please.
Yes.
Love to know. Yeah.
Thank you. Murat, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, I mean, no one else has.
If nobody else has a question, I think Esra does. Let's turn to Esra and then we'll come back to you, Murat.
Okay.
And you can maybe think of a few more examples for us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for the lovely speech. I was thinking about what was I asking, but so many questions have come. I've taken many notes.
Okay.
But you gave some answers when you were explaining it. I was just thinking about the phylum sensitivity and the peace trending in Turkish. We all know that peace trending is not allowed in Turkish, but how about such fragments? Ayşe kiminle konuşuyor? Rather than Ali ile Ali. Evet Ali. Ayşe Ali ile mi konuşuyor? Evet, Ali. How does it sound?
Any answers?
Ayşe Ali ile mi?
Can you repeat your?
Evet, Ali.
Can you repeat your data?
Ayşe Ali ile mi konuşuyor? Evet, Ali.
That's good.
We can omit ila, the preposition.
Yeah. But I'm not sure ile is really a postposition.
No, I don't think we can.
Athletic, but
I think it should be evet Ali ile. Right? Like with
Well,
Ali.
to me, it's also good. I mean, if you say Ali kiminle konuşuyor? Sorry, what was the question? Ayşe kiminle konuşuyor? Ayşe Ali ile mi konuşuyor? Evet, Ali.
Yeah.
That's good. I mean,
is there a possibility of it being like a couple of clause, like Bu Ali, for example? Would that possibly be the, or I wonder whether there's a way to kind of ensure that it's still case marked, but then take away the postposition. But I, you know, my knowledge of Turkish isn't that strong, so I don't know whether you can case mark things. You case mark things and have prepositions, and then you can take, sorry, postpositions, and then you can take away the postposition and keep the case marking. I don't know where that would happen.
If you have pronominal element with ile,
yeah, that would work.
Genitive
Yeah.
ones.
Like sana or something.
Senin ile.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So now try and do a fragment like that and take the preposition away.
Let's try.
Yeah.
Ali seninle mi konuşuyor? Evet, benim. It's ungrammatical. No, it's bad.
Ungrammatical.
Yeah, so I think that's a good way to control. The problem in the ellipsis literature, or generally whenever you do ellipsis, is there's often many alternatives or potentials for what the elliptic clause could be. And so half of the work is controlling for that and making sure that there's only one possibility, and then you can kind of make generalizations over the data. Like most of the things I've done, I've thought I've done something and thought I haven't controlled for this properly afterwards. So it does happen very, very frequently. But I should say that as I know of the Turkish literature on these elliptical phenomena, there is some disagreement about the postposition stranding. And I know that in Turkish you have some rather long and complex postpositions that are quite heavy, like lots of syllables. And apparently they can disappear a bit more easily than very simple ones, just like, you know, with like le or something like this. So yeah, I don't know, like altern, is that a postposition? I don't know. I can't give you an example, but something longer at least.
Altında.
Altında, for example.
But I am not sure whether it's a postposition because it's case marked. It behaves like a noun. I mean,
okay, so it's a noun. Okay, all right. So maybe that's just noun ellipsis then. All right.
Maybe göre.
Yeah, I mean, they say that we have two types of postpositions in Turkish. One which is bare postpositions like göre, için, rağmen, or whatever. And the other parts includes such examples like altında, üstünde. But I don't think that those are really, I mean, genuine postpositions.
You can have them with the noun, without the noun, right? Standalone directional kind of arguments. Yeah, I see. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. All right. Good to know.
Okay. Thank you. Esra, do you have any more questions before I turn to Murat?
You can pass another person.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was a great question.
Thank you very much.
No, I'm also okay.
Right. Yes.
I'm done. Yeah.
You're done. You sure? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your great questions. Yes, does anybody else have any questions? Can we see the hands, please? If not, I'm going to turn back to Murat so that he can ask us his question. Because I'm very curious. He's like, don't ask me, but I will. Okay, I don't think we have any more questions.
We can close the session if you like, because no one else.
Can I just ask one very general question?
Yeah.
Actually, what I'm asking is an advice, because we said it would be great research to be done on Turkish. Now, your experience is very, very precious and it's very important. And for those who wish to carry out this reprise fragments in Turkish, what would you advise them to do? What path would you tell them to go through?
It's a very good question. So I think half of the battle here with the reprise fragments is also the comparison with the standard fragment cases. So I think having a good a good idea about how standard fragments are formed in Turkish is probably the first step in this process, a long process actually. And that in itself would be very worthwhile research to do. What I find particularly interesting about Turkish is, of course, you make your standard WH questions without any movement, and they seem to be island insensitive. At the very end of my talk there, I was talking about the fact, if you recall, let's see if I can throw the example back up so we can see something. Just these standard cases like this, right? So Mary fired someone, yes, Bob. And I said, in English, these things have A-bar properties because really this is an answer to a WH question, standard WH question, which has been formed by A-bar movement. Now, if this was the Turkish situation, it would, according to me, it would still be, this would still be answering an inferred question, but it would be a question that's not created via WH movement in Turkish. It would not have it. So my theory could potentially predict different properties for standard fragments for Turkish based upon the fact that Turkish is a WH and C2 language. So where I would start with this is, what are the properties of standard fragments in Turkish really? And do you or do you not see island sensitivity for these things, and in which cases? I'd particularly focus on like adjunct islands, because that's the famous case for Turkish, right? And like really try and control for these well. There is some literature on this in Turkish from Atakan İnce is the person who's famously worked on these. And I think his name's Serkan Şener is the other person that's worked on them a lot. They disagree a little bit, and I think they would be the starting points for me, and just to see whether you agree with that data and maybe see if it could be controlled better. I think that would be the starting point for this. But otherwise, if you're definitely interested in the reprise part, try and replicate some of the cases that I've given here and see if they do distribute the same or don't, and why. And like try and think that would be the case. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, James.
Thank you very much for your time and for having me. I've very much enjoyed it. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for spending your time with us tonight. Seriously, it was great having you here. I know, and I'm talking on behalf of everybody, and we have a few messages thanking you. We were all very, very happy with tonight. It was great. It was a great experience. We got to learn a lot of things, and we had fun. Thank you. Seriously, we can't thank you enough.
You're very welcome.
It's really nice. Yeah.
Can you see the box?
We also have some messages in the chat box. Thank you so much for a useful presentation, James, and thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks. Okay. Well, have a nice weekend, all, and yes, I hope all goes well. So maybe we'll meet again in the future, and if anybody wants to email me about anything at some point, of course, I'm available as well. So
I hope so. And if anybody does research this in Turkish, please do share with us, because I know that everybody in this session right now is all very curious, and we're all waiting to see the results of it.
Let me echo that sentiment, certainly.
Yes. Thank you, James, again. Thank you, everyone, for attending the 56th talk of the İzmir Linguistics Circle. It was great. I love being here as well. Thank you very much, Murat and Nesra. I had a great evening. I know you guys had a great evening. Thank you for everything, İzmir.
We had a great evening. Thank you.
Take very good care of yourselves. Hope to see you guys on this 57th talk.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Next week.
İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar.
Teşekkür ederiz James.